It's time to talk about a couple of different topics. This is depending on where you are in this cloud journey and how familiar you are with SharePoint, Azure, etc. This might be a level 400. If you've done something and understand the concepts, it's level 200. But my idea with this session is to get you to understand how to move your customizations to the cloud and adapt to the Office 365 platform and SharePoint Online, how to use the right tools in the Azure, all the Azure services. And this is actually one of my personal favorite sessions because I've done it a couple of times, but it's not a repeat for me. Every single time I have to rebuild the whole session because things are moving so fast in Azure. There's coming new services that are better for different purposes. So I have to adapt all the time. And I had some major issues, and just 5 minutes before I went in this room, I nailed the last demo because of some issues in Azure with stuff that's not properly working yet. But the idea here is that so you can take this back home and understand how are we going to build our next application or customization? What services in Azure should we use? Especially if you're coming from a SharePoint on-premises world where you can do full trust code. And the agenda for today, my name is Wictor Wilén from Stockholm, Sweden, works for Avanade, running the collaboration team in Sweden. This is my third time here at Evo, I think, and it's fun as always. So the idea is first to give you an overview of why we do these kind of customizations and the history behind it and the rationale, so to say, why we should use Azure instead of building stuff that we traditionally used to do. And using Azure, we can actually use that for on-prem stuff as well, or in the combination in hybrid mode. So that's really important, not just if you're on going to 365 100%, but even if you're living in a hybrid state, Azure is really interesting. But these are the things we're going to cover. SharePoint Online, of course, and Office 2016 Preview. I made sure all the demos working on the Office client. We will take a look at web apps and API apps. That was announced 2-3 weeks ago. And also logic apps to replace some custom code with. We'll take a look at the service bus and an alternative to that one, Hybrid Connection Manager. We'll only talk about the Hybrid Connection Manager, but we'll actually do a demo of service bus. We'll take a look at the Redis cache, which is a fantastic cache service that you can use in Azure. We'll take a quick look at access control services, because that's part of the glue between everything. As soon as you create a SharePoint Online app, you're using Azure Access Control Services. And of course, Visual Studio and ASP.NET. So these are just a few of those different technologies that we will cover during this session. Is it demo now? Yeah, sorry, that was just, it's when I converted the slides, all that, sorry. It's hard-coded in the slide demo, but it's not demo time now. Sorry about that. But the history behind it, how many of you have been with us in the SharePoint 2007 world, when Farm Solutions was introduced? So that's quite a few of us. That basically we build stuff, put into SharePoint, all the code executed within SharePoint. If your code broke, then the whole farm broke, basically. It was a good solution back then, but it's not sustainable over a long time. We had the server-side object model, which was already back in 2007, it was quite bad because it was piggybacking on the 2003 server object model, etc. So it wasn't really a good solution. But it's a disclaimer, or not disclaimer, but it's still a valid approach. For some scenarios for on-premises solutions, you can still do full trust code. You need to do that. But Microsoft wanted to have this SharePoint Online and Exchange and everything in the cloud, in the Office 365 service. So they introduced something that they back then thought was a good idea, the sandbox solution framework. It was a partial object model. It was a separate process, so we didn't crash the SharePoint server if your code broke. We had both declarative and the code-based approach. Now later with 2013, the code-based approach is deprecated. It's still very valid to do declarative approach in some cases. But with 2013, a new concept was introduced, and Microsoft don't recommend us any longer to use sandbox solutions. It's the app model, and basically meaning We get better API hooks into SharePoint, and we put everything outside of SharePoint running in an IIS farm, in Azure, in a Node.js. We can run our, as Andrew Connell, I think, if you have time, he will do a demo of a Raspberry Pi running Node.js talking to Office 365. So you can run your stuff on a Raspberry Pi if you want to. Not recommended for production usage, but you can do it. So basically, we're doing everything outside. And I was really glad with this approach, because SharePoint developers are hard to find, and ASP.NET developers don't want to touch SharePoint. But with this model, we can actually broaden our scope and have more people working on SharePoint projects, which is really good. But you know all that. But the key thing is still, all these solutions are still valid. But for now, we focus on the apps part. And why apps? From my perspective, it's a way more modern platform. First of all, we have the luxury of working with JavaScript. Everybody loves JavaScript, right? So most of the code and samples and everything are JavaScript-based. For demos, it might work, but for an enterprise scenario, there are a lot of issues actually with JavaScript. JavaScript is good for a UI thing, but not for application logic all the time, unless you're running Node.js, of course. HTML5 as a user interface and CSS3. We're using HTML5 to build Windows apps nowadays, so that's a good idea. And as the statistics says, 75% of all developers know HTML5 or similar. So there's a lot of developers out there that can actually use these technologies. There's nothing new, no rocket science. Microsoft has rethought how they build their APIs. They build everything more public nowadays. So it's Office 365 APIs are more documented, more publicly tested. We're not limiting ourselves to using Microsoft apps. We can use other integration points, as in not Office app, but Azure apps as well, or apps running in someone else's service. We can use the full stack for everyone. We can use Azure stuff. We can use Linux, Apache, Node.js, whatever. Or the cloud first. Skip the mobile first, but cloud first is more interesting for me. If we get the HTML5 stuff, then we have the mobile stuff, if you do it properly. So the cloud first approach with SharePoint and all their customizations is, of course, the right way to go. Cloud doesn't necessarily mean the public cloud. It could be the private cloud as well. But the cloud is where we should strive after. But here are the things that we as farm solution developers are due. There's questions that we get when we're moving from farm solutions to the apps. So how do we do integration with our legacy systems, our SQL servers or FoxPro databases or whatever that we have running on premises when we're running the stuff in Azure? How do we time jobs? We can't do the timer job with JavaScript. Cannot do that. How do we write server-side code? Because we want to protect our application logic, both from reverse engineering. If everything is JavaScript, anyone can steal your application logic or whatever, or borrow it. So how do we protect our stuff? Where do we host it? Do we host it in Azure? Do we host it on IIS farms, etc.? And of course, it's hard. Not everyone likes to learn new stuff. So, and people think, it was better before I could write my WSP solution, deploy it. The farm had to restart. It took a couple of minutes, and I had to plan this 3 months ahead to get my CSS fix into production. Some people thought that was better, but not me. And with this new evergreen world, with the DevOps, etc., we need to be more agile. But these are a couple of questions that I will cover in this session. So that was the intro. Now we're going to talk about Azure, SharePoint Online, and I divided the remaining of this session in 5 different scenarios. So I walk through a scenario and show how we built that out. And everything in this demo is basically from customer demands and stuff that we build for customers. And of course, if there's anything, if you don't understand anything, scream, raise your hand, jump up and down or something, and ask questions during the session. So in this case, we have a company called Contoso. They have a lot of stuff in SharePoint on premises and a lot of investment in their on-premises infrastructure. but they would like to move to Office 365 and start building customizations. So the first thing they do is look into the app model, of course, and they have an Azure Enterprise Agreement, so of course Azure is the perfect solution for them. So what they want to do is create an app. In this case, it's an app that they would like to show product data and get information about products. So they decide to use ASP.NET MVC to build out an app. They used HTML5 and CSS and JavaScript for the UI. They of course use Visual Studio. Actually, I'm reverted from 2015 to 2013 for the demo because there's some parts with Visual Studio 2015 that doesn't work with the Azure integration. Then we will host this in Azure using Azure Web Apps, previously known as Azure Websites, and of course everything will be using OAuth for authentication, authorization underneath, and using the access control services. And this is generic picture. We have an Azure website hosting our data. We have access control servicing, making sure the app can do the right kind of stuff, and we have SharePoint Online. So for this, I'm going to show you how we set up Visual Studio Solution. I don't have time. There's a lot of code in here, so I focus on the important parts. I will not write code from scratch. But here's my solution. Currently, it's 6 different projects in my Visual Studio Solution. To start with, I created a SharePoint app, SharePoint provider hosted app, which has a couple of things we will see later. But first of all, when I created my SharePoint hosted app, it's also created my SharePoint web project down here, which is the actual MVC project. Let's close that one down. And this is very easy. Everything you get everything from start. Everything is included in Visual Studio. So just download the tooling, make sure it's up to date, and follow the wizard. It's no rocket science at all. Everything is hooked up, and it by default creates a home view for you. That looks like this. How many of you are familiar with MVC in here? Okay, for those who aren't, you should really look into MVC instead of ASP.NET Web Forms. And ASP.NET Web Forms is actually deprecated since ASP.NET 4.6. That was announced 3-4 weeks ago as well. So look into MVC. But I have this is in this case is a view that's the UI of my application. It's a default view. I haven't changed anything there. All views, a view can have a controller, and the controller is the actual logic behind it. And in this case as well, I haven't changed anything, but basically it fetches the user's name and shows it in the view. So the key things to remember here is that this is an index view, the index view method of the controller that will do all the logic in this actual controller. But we have this SharePoint context filter on top of that method, which means that all calls into this one has to be authorized through access control services. And that's code that Microsoft provides for us. We don't have to do anything, just put this attribute on the methods that we need authorization on. And that's done by 2 classes that's automatically added to a project when you create it. It's token helper and SharePoint context. And there's a couple of other helper methods in those as well. Then, when I set up this project, Visual Studio asked me, where do you want to host this? And I answered Azure and deployed it into Azure website. It's actually not called an Azure website, it's an Azure app. Web app nowadays. Everything is apps. So I'm creating my app in an Azure web app. Apps in apps again. Did you notice that during the keynote? SharePoint apps, or Office apps wasn't called Office apps anymore. Office add-ins, for those who were awake. Okay, so to publish this one, I just right-click on my SharePoint project, and I click on Publish. And Visual Studio does everything for this for me. And I click Deploy your web project, and it will be deployed to Azure websites, Azure web app, sorry. So this is very, very easy. I don't have to do anything. All the gluing is there. it asks me for authentication. Should have done that before. How many uses two-factor authentication on their live account? Not that many. Okay, so it will just publish this one. So now it's actually available out there in Azure. So while we're doing that, let's minimize that one. Let's jump on over to Azure. How many of you have seen the new Azure portal? It is the future. It's great, actually, except if you're running it in Chrome, because it sucks a lot of memory from your machine. But Chrome is I need to do that because I need to have several profiles now. But here's my Azure portal, and let's go into my resource group. That's down here. We should have the SB Evo resource group. So everything is, let's put it, you should, from now on, always you start from the resource group perspective in Azure. Resource group is a new way of, not that new, it's been there for a couple of months now, but it's a way to actually group and contain your different artifacts within Azure together within the resource group. So all the resources should be in one of those. Instead of the old portal where you had everything in your subscription in just a long list, you have to go to page 27 just to take a look at the different items. So everything is in a resource group here, and in this resource group I have 7 resources. And what I just published was this web app. So here's my web app. And it's up and running. We get statistics and everything in here, which is really good. And just let's browse to that one. And what's really good actually with this one, using Azure Websites.net, is that always has an HTTPS endpoint. So we don't have to worry about certificates and stuff like that, because we want certificates on our data. It will take a couple of seconds the first time it loads up, since I just published it. And we get an error. That was expected. Because I was retrieving the index view now, which I had that SharePoint controller attribute on. So I need to be authenticated. And to fast forward a bit, I actually already published this app in the app catalog within my company. So I have not that one. Yeah, it's that one. I have it's called AdventureWorks here actually, but that's my app. I published in our corporate app store. So now anyone within our company can install this app into the site collection. And we have done that in this site collection. And now when I click on this one, click on that one. Now we're being redirected over to the app. But also I'm authenticated already, and it sends over a couple of things to the web app, and now we're also authorized, and it writes out my name here. Another thing that we can notice here is that we actually have a UI which very much looks like SharePoint, except the sweet bar. So I have the Chrome around here, actually. And that's done by a very simple thing, by injecting some JavaScript into your views, so you can get the SharePoint look, and that adapts to your theme on your site, etc. Except it's not the sweet bar experience. And I haven't heard anything about them Microsoft updating this JavaScript injection so you can actually support the sweet bar. I hope they do that very soon, because especially if you have all this delve and stuff, it's just a long list of links up there. But that's just how it is. And let's just take a look at that Chrome. Oh, it wants me to sign in here as well. And, that's just Visual Studio asking me to sign in so I can deploy the SharePoint app as well. But if we take a look at my view here, down at the bottom, the index view, this is just some HTML. It's not much in here. And this is a partial view in this case. So I have the corresponding thing that you have in MVC, which is called shared layouts file. And this is the layouts file. That's just like a master page. And let's scroll down a bit here. No, scroll down to the bottom. I added this div in here with that information, and also added a chrome.js file which you can download from MSDN into this app. And just by adding that chrome.js file and this div, I get the Chrome experience, and I can use the SharePoint CSS classes when formatting my stuff. And I can add some settings, link, etc. for navigation as well in that application bar. Okay, this wasn't much rocket science. Many of you have most likely seen all of this before, but this is stuff that's most of it, I would say, are built into Visual Studio. So if you're fortunate to work with Visual Studio, everything is very easy. If you're working on other platforms, you don't need to go other ways to publish stuff, etc. But let's jump back to the presentation. So now we set the stage for the rest of the session. And the first thing, and this is almost every cases I've been running with customers, they have stuff on premises. They have a SQL server or whatever, they have some data on premises they want to show in Azure. And the first solution, of course, you have to set up an IIS server on premise and iframe that one into the solution. But then we need to open firewalls if people are on the mobile phones or whatever. The second thing is, okay, we move the SQL server to SQL Azure. And that's a total valid reason in many cases. You can move the data from on-premises to Azure. But not everyone likes that. They like to keep they want to cuddle with their SQL servers, especially if you talk to SQL Server admin. They like to see it blinking and stuff like that. They want to change a disk sometimes and switch some wires. That's SQL guys. But so let them have their SQL Server running. They invest a lot of time and money in that. So let's instead use some kind of way for us to leverage that data as an API endpoint in Azure. And that's very easily done using Azure Service Bus. Azure Service Bus is basically you building an app on premise, an app that exposes a WCF endpoint. And in using Azure Service Bus, you hook that Azure endpoint up to that WCF endpoint up to Azure. So you expose that endpoint in Azure. So all the questions from the public cloud goes down through the Service Bus down onto your application on premise. It's using ACS as the authentication and authorization mechanism as well. So what you heard actually about ACS moving away in favor of Azure AD, ACS will be there in some kind of form. It will be merged into Azure AD. But ACS is the key for everything of this get up and running. We also have another option which is called the Hybrid Connection Manager. If it's a SQL server, it's very easily just they pre-built an application like that. It's using Azure Service Bus and similar. But you can basically download Hybrid Connection Manager, install that on your machine, connect that to your SQL server, and then you connect that to Azure as well. Then you get the port 1433 to your machine up in Azure, so you can use it just as a normal SQL database. That's very easily done. So just go in into Azure and download that Hybrid Connection configuration application. Key is finding that one in Azure. You actually need to create a BizTalk service to get them. And also, you need to create a BizTalk service using the PowerShell commandlets nowadays. Because by default, when you spin up a BizTalk service in Azure, the ACS connection is not there. And that's only an option that's available if you do it using PowerShell. For that reason and many other reasons, I decided to use the Service Bus instead. So let's take a look how that is built out. And let's jump on over to Visual Studio. First of all, I don't have SQL Server on my laptop here, so I use the, what's it called? When you just have the MDB file running. Let's see where it is. A local DB, yeah, it's called local DB. So I local DB of an AdventureWorks database. I define the data for my AdventureWorks products. Oh, sorry. Here's the data contract for it. I need product name, product number, and list price. This is the data I want to fetch and I want to leverage in my Azure app. So I just made a data contract. I also made an endpoint for my service, which just contains get products. It's very simple. You get all the products in the product database and return them to me. So I made that definition in one simple C# project up here. Then I created the Azure Service Bus, and that should be this project, which is a console application. For production usage, you should not use a console application. You should build a Windows service or something, because this one will be your host on premises that you connect to Azure. For that, we have the program here. See if we can get a bit bigger screen. What's happening here is that we're starting something called a service host first, like that, which will host my AdventureWork products interface, or the definition of that WCF endpoint. So I create that service host. Then I need to add 2 endpoints. First of all, we have the local endpoint. What will this be called internally within our organization on premises? This is the endpoint that I will use on this machine. Secondly, I will need to define the external endpoint, and that's what we're connecting to the Azure Service Bus. So I create a new endpoint and create a service URI using SB and the name of my service bus that I already created. We'll take a look at that one soon in Azure. And I also need to get the what's it called here? Secret, the issuer secret. I get that from the Azure portal as well, because that's what ACS is using to make sure that we're allowed to call into this channel that we're setting up. So it's a couple of few lines only. Then I add some methods to this one. So for the opened event, I just write it opened, for fault event, faulted, etc. And yeah, then I just have a read line waiting for someone to press the key so the application ends. So it's just sitting there running. I have another file in this project as well, which is the actual service, which is an implementation of that interface I created. And here we're actually talking to the data context, and we're returning all the first 100 items and returning them. And I also add a console write line in this one, so we can also see in the console when someone actually hits this endpoint. For this, for debugging purposes, of course. And now I'll start that exe file here. I don't start it from Visual Studio, because if we need to debug stuff, then we'd shut this one down. And without this one running, all the demos fail. This can take a couple of seconds, depending on your network infrastructure, etc. Because now we're actually opening something up from inside out. We're not letting Azure talk from outside in, but we're opening this gateway out. And that can take up to 30, 40 seconds sometimes, doing that initial discovery when it needs to find the correct route out. So let's jump on over to Azure portal, not that one. And you should see here that if we take browse and try to find the service bus, we can see there's no service bus here. So we need to go to the old portal. Where's the old portal? Am I blind? Classic portal, there. So we need to use a classic portal to access the service bus stuff. As I said, I already created the service bus. Let's do like this. Let's close this application first. So now I'm into my old portal, and as you can see, this UI doesn't scale, since I have to page to get all my stuff in here. But if you scroll down here on the left-hand side and try to find service bus, service bus, service bus. Sometimes I'm blind. Hello. Am I blind? Yeah. Still loading? I can't see it. It's still loading here. That's why. Power of the cloud. Let's reload it. I just want to show you how the endpoint shows up there when we start the application. Come on. There it is. And here you can see that's the one. Which one did I use? the one called that one, yeah. And here's my Azure Service Bus, and you see I've done a lot of demos and I run out of credits. Don't try running too many VMs at the same time. I have a session on Wednesday, which I spend most of my money in just the first week. I spent over the last 1.5 weeks, I spun up over 35 SharePoint forms just to try stuff out. And that costs a lot of money. So we want to go into something called relays. And currently we should have no relays in there. But as soon as we start the application down here, we should actually see the relay. Opening. Opened. And it should, just a couple of seconds, it should appear here. Let's do like that. Let's jump on over. Yeah, and there's our relay. And we see we have one listener on that one endpoint now. So now we're actually connected to the cloud. But still, there's no way for us to easily invoke this method. So for that, I actually created an Azure API app. Previously in my demos, I created an API controller in my MVC app, and so I could post to that one. But instead, now I moved that into a separate project called an Azure API app, which is very similar to the MVC project. So we have the SharePoint API here. We have controllers for all our API endpoints, and I have an AdventureWorks controller here. So let's take a look at that one. It's very simple. I have a get method. Scroll down. And in here is actually two things. First of all, we're going to call the service bus on premises, but I also implemented caching here, because the service bus isn't the fastest thing in the world. If you want fast responses, you should implement some kind of caching here. And there's the other reasons as well. You don't utilize the service bus that much. If there's a lot of data moving back and forth, it costs you bandwidth, etc., etc. So for this, I used the Azure Redis cache. And I created an instance of the Azure Redis cache, and I downloaded the NuGet package. It's from Stack Exchange Redis, it's called. I added some stuff up here. Just to have my connection, and I established the connection to the Azure Redis cache up here with the password. So that's just done. And then it's very easy to use this cache. I create a connection to the database, and I use get and put basically to that cache. We could spend a whole session about the Azure Redis cache, and it's very, very smart, and it's something you should really read into. It's not just a cache, it has logic in it as well. You can query it just like a database. That's why it's called a database as well. It's not just a bucket of items. So first of all, I try to find the stuff in the cache. Can I find my products? No, I can't. In that case, I will establish a connection from my API app, logic app in this case, to the service bus endpoint. So just as I created a connection from my on-premise to the service bus, I need to create a connection from my consuming app to the service bus. And this connection can actually take a couple of seconds as well. That's why you should have caching here if you need fast responses. So we create a channel factory, we create an endpoint, and then we just get the channel and invoke the get products method, which is exactly the thing we defined. So I get back the results, add them to the cache, and they will be there for 5 minutes. So, which basically means I can very easily, just with a REST call, get the JSON data or XML back and use this in the client. What I needed to add as well here, it's really important. I needed to add this enable CORS. CORS is to handle cross-domain scenarios. Because this app will be published to a unique DNS name, and I want to be able to use this using JavaScript, so I can call from my app, which has one DNS name, to the API that has another DNS name. And to be able to do that using web browser security, I need to enable CORS in my API app here. So basically, in this case, I say all GET methods using any headers from anyone can use this app. So I could specify just these domains are allowed, etc. Another thing I don't show here is that I don't use authentication on this one. of course, this endpoint should be using authentication. So not everyone can call into your products database. But that can be done using Azure AD, if you create an Azure AD application, and ADAL.js libraries as well, so you can get client-side authentication and authorization. So once I publish this API app, I actually get an API in the cloud. And I did one more thing which is really important on this one. We should have it, where is it? API app start. That's something called Swagger config. Anybody heard about Swagger? A couple of you? Swagger is a metadata format for APIs. And in this Swagger API is a lot of stuff commented out that you can comment to enable authentication, etc., etc. But I commented out one section there. Enable Swagger UI, which is a really good way for me to test my applications. And I published this one to Azure already. And if we go to the Azure portal, that browser, there we go. Go into my resource group again. We will find the API app here. And the API app is actually two things. This is the where's the API app? The API app, but it also creates a gateway. So it can be a little bit confusing. They haven't sorted out exactly how this will be. This will change. But right now it looks like that. Because the API app is essentially in Azure websites. So if I browse to my API app, to that URL, I get this one nice page. But since I enabled the Swagger UI, I can do /Swagger. And it will automatically create a UI for me to test my different endpoints. So I want to test the AdventureWorks endpoint. I want to test the get method. And I both get the schema here, and if there's a post action, I can insert data and test with that data. I can fiddle with the different response content types, and then finally get the response back. So this is a good way to testing out my API endpoints. And we should see in our console app, we should see a ping down there. And for subsequent requests, it should go faster. I'm clicking a lot here, but we're only seeing one ping because everything is cached now for 5 minutes. So within 5 minutes from now, we will see another ping when we request that one in. But the first time, yes, it takes some time to understand how the service bus and all the connections and endpoints works out, but it's a really good way of doing it. And you can still leverage, for instance, if you have some kind of SOA architecture internally, or it's very easy for your developers, internal developers, just to build out the WSF endpoint or whatever endpoint. So then you build this small console or Windows service application, publish that, and you can access that in any Azure service or any cloud service whatsoever, using an API endpoint. So that was how to get that working. Let's go back to the slides. What time is it? Yes. So we used the caching and API apps was the key things here. And I really like the API apps. We'll see that in the next thing is a lot of things you can do with that. So basically we're cheating the firewalls here. We don't have to do any firewall configuration whatsoever. Okay, so let's show this data in our application. And of course, we're using SharePoint app part for this one. And even though Andrew, if you want to just watch his session this morning, he was talking about Angular. I prefer using Knockout. That's very, how many of you use Knockout in here? Knockout is a very friendly way of doing great model view control, MVVM patterns. And it's not that much code. I think Angular can be a bit harder if you don't understand it. I already told you about the course and enabled on the API endpoint. So for this one, we jump on over to Visual Studio again. And in my, sorry about the screen resolution, but this is how it must work. In my SharePoint application, I added a products web part. And when I add that product web part using the Visual Studio tooling, it asks me to create a view and a controller in the MVC project. That's exactly what we have here. Now, go down to that one. We have a product web part controller. I'm not doing any server-side code here for the controller. We'll just use JavaScript. But we have the view for the products web part down here. And it's a very simple view. It's just a header and a div, and then I use the partial thing. This is one of the beauties with MVC. You can really separate code in different pieces and reuse logic as well. So I use something called partial here. So I have the product list as a partial CSHTML file, which is just a table, and we use knockout for each to iterate over the stuff we get back. I also created a layouts file for this one, for web part, just to make the UI a little bit better, because an app part, as you know, is an iframe, and you don't want all that clutter around in your iframe. You just want it simple. So I created that one a little bit smaller, some JavaScript to that one, and just render the body. So it's very easy. But to get this one working, as I said, I have some scripts. I have, first of all, the view model of my product is basically the same that we saw in C#. Then I have a method that loads all my customers. And here you have the reason we need to have CORS. Since we have this URL, which is my web API app, that's why I need to have CORS. If I have it in the same project, MVC project, then I'm just calling it locally. So this is basically knockout, get all the stuff, and just push them out to this array. And this final file is just the one that actually starts everything. So let's take a look at, since this is deployed with my app, it should already be in my tenant. Go back to site. So let's create a page. Let's create a page here. Add a page. Evo, create. It shouldn't take long. And let's insert our app part. It should be here somewhere. Products web part, yes. Add. Let's save that one. So now, yeah, there we got the products listed. And hopefully we saw a new ping as well. Yes, we did. So it actually queried my endpoint this time. But yeah, I'm no UX guy, so don't blame me for it looking like crap. But something is showing at least. But we get the stuff that's actually in our product database now, all using JavaScript in this case. If there's more, some cases we would like to do this server-side rendering, but in this case it's a good way to do it client-side. Since we're actually going to reuse this in another application very soon. But this is a very good way just to show data from your systems, back-end systems that you have today. It's a very common scenario. So with that, I think it's time to jump over to the last demo. No, slides first, before we take a look at the other stuff. So that wasn't, since we set up that API app, we can do pretty much, we can do a lot of things with that API, and of course we can have post back items and update the product catalog as well. Yeah, but assume that our salespeople at the Contoso organization, they want this product data to be in a document so they can download it and print and have it show to the customers, etc. They want that updated regularly. That's stuff we did with timer jobs or other stuff previously. How do we do that in Azure? And previously I created, I actually will do that now as well. I created an endpoint that I can call into. When someone calls into that endpoint, we pull down all the product data, we create a text file, it could be Word document or Excel or whatever, and upload to the SharePoint document library. Previously I'd done Azure Web Gems and used that one to actually call this endpoint or do this data or use a PowerShell with the scheduled tasks. But Now with the logic apps, there's an even cooler way of doing it. Let's just jump on over to Azure. Oh, we can go into the document library first. I have a document library here. It should be empty if I done my prep. No. Ah, I have the application running in the background. So 12 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, it updated this one. So just remove that one so you can see that I'm not cheating. So let's jump on over to Azure. You remember I had this Swagger. The Swagger, that's the metadata exchange for API. And actually, Azure uses this one internally as well. So if we go down here and we'll create a new logic app. So let's click Add to create a new resource. I choose the logic app, create that one, give it a name, SB Evo background job. Choose which service plan to use. We should have, no, I won't use that one, yeah. Depending on the free one, then you can have these logic apps execute once an hour, I think, or every 50 minutes or something. If you pay for it, you can both have them running even more often and consume more data, etc. Let's create that one. If we go back to our resource group, that one, we should see our logic app here within a second. Hopefully. Why didn't it show up? Did I put it somewhere else? Still building. Oh, there it is. Okay, so now I created my logic app, but I need to define the logic in here. And logic in the logic app is defined by triggers and actions. So this looks far better on a big screen because it's big tiles and boxes and stuff like that. So with this, let's zoom out a bit, see if you can see better. Okay, that works. So I need to start my logic, and I do that by adding. No, it doesn't look good at all. Let's reload the page and do it again. Because now we have basically a drag and drop surface there. So we need some space so we can actually do that. It's like SharePoint Designer, but in Azure. Azure Designer. Okay. Okay, here's our surface. So I need to insert my start logic, and I insert the recurrence thing here, and I say every hour I want this job to kick off. Then it also discovers the API endpoints that actually is in my resource group, that I already deployed to this resource group. Or I can add other stuff here. I can buy stuff on the marketplace. For instance, I want a Twitter app to send out a tweet every time we do a big sales or whatever. And I can build that kind of logic in here. Or just call into an HTTP endpoint. But it discovered that I had an API already deployed to my resource group. And it also discovers the methods within that one. We can either get all the products or can post this product catalog endpoint. And this one asks for a parameter. Basically, I can't actually write anything in here because there's a bug right now in Azure Logic Apps. It doesn't send in any parameters. You always get null. I struggled with this one for days. You just found out that there's a bug in some scenarios. So I hard-coded the URL already. Now you know that. So now I created my logic app. So once an hour, call this endpoint. And it actually, when you save it, it automatically runs that command once. Let's close that one down. One trigger, one action. Okay, let's run it, see what's happened. They had it down here. The first run was on 3:44 seconds. We can actually go in and see there and see the results of it. And the output link here says it was a... yeah, it returns. It doesn't return anything but we can see that it succeeded. Otherwise, we get an error message in here. And we should be able to go back to our document library and reload this one, and being able to see the document here just created. So once an hour now, this will trigger, hit my endpoint, and upload this file into my SharePoint Online tenant, which is a really good way of making this kind of stuff. The actual API endpoint is very similar to the one we looked at earlier, except I use some CSOM to upload the stuff. So it's in here, in the controller, then I have a product catalog endpoint. But as I said, as you can see here, I hard-coded URL already, because always get in null, doesn't matter. So now it's the time for the last scenario. So now we have updates for our Salesforce as well. The final thing is the salespeople, they don't use SharePoint, they use Office. So they want this stuff in Office instead. They could care less about SharePoint than going in there and watch the product data. They want it in Office. So of course we can leverage our data as an Office app as well, or Office add-in. And I use the same Azure API app. I basically use the same JavaScript and the same knockout view models. And I use Office OpenXML to create good data. When you create, here's a tip for you. When you create an Office application, it does exactly the same as with the SharePoint provider hosted application. It creates an Office app project and a web app project as well. But what I did, I created that one, then I just copied the file from that web app project into the provider hosted web project I already have. So I don't have to deploy two different websites. So all of that is deployed into this one. And it's a lot of scripts under Office here. You can also do all this manually by downloading the correct NuGet packages. But what I've done is actually create a new controller and new view. So I have an index here, and the product list just as the web part, with the difference that the product list here actually has a click function, so I can click on the document and insert the product data into the Office document. I already deployed this one into the App Store, so I have apps on my local tenants. I have this product in there, and if all your offices are configured correctly to point to your local App Store, it should appear in Office as well. So let's start Word. This is a Word app only. Create a blank document. I'm logged in as Sarah Davis, the tenant. If I go to Insert, Apps, let's click on My Apps, and I'll click on My Organization, and there's the actual Office app that I have. And let's insert that one. So now the same here should happen. It should download all the product data and show it in there. Of course, if it was a real app, I should add search and that kind of stuff, but now it just shows the first 100 items. And if I'm writing an RFP or something, I need to insert some pricing details or whatever, I can click on Insert. And as you can see, it actually creates a table for me, so I can do nice formatting of that information, which is a great way for you to integrate your backend data published in Azure back to your own premises. And I can tell you, you can also debug these API endpoints. It can get a little bit weird because you're debugging something on your local machine that's in the cloud that's connecting back to your own local machine. So the files are sitting next to each other, but you're round tripping Azure. So your head goes spinning after a while. Where am I? Yeah, but this is really, you see, that's one thing I didn't, I'm not entirely finished with this demo, or this is actually for another thing, but you can actually add bindings as well. So next time someone opens this document, and opens this app, it could check the price. Oh, the price has changed since last time. But I'm not, so I just have that price tag in there. So that's another thing that's coming in upcoming sessions for next year, maybe. But this is, as I said, a great way to actually leverage this kind of data. And this doesn't work only in Office 2016, but in 2013 as well, in Office Online. Yeah. And if we take a look at the actual app, it looks like there's a small JavaScript I have. It's in scripts, it's in app. So it's 2 JavaScripts basically to get this one to work. First of all, just starting everything and adding some methods to fix the UI. Then I have the second JavaScript file, which is called home. And this is very similar to the actual the knockout, the web part we just built. But I have the insert product function here. And that one actually reads from a template and replaces ID and name, number, not price yet. Then it just sets that data into the Office document. And you can read as well. You could basically have, if you click on a document, a name, you could search for that name in the product catalog or whatever, then insert the data. And the template is actually a large, let's zoom out here. It's a large OpenXML chunk that I created a Word document, I created a table, renamed the docx file to zip, open it up, and then copy paste that XML, and then added my placeholders to replace the prices. I'm doing all this JavaScript creating Office OpenXML stuff, which is really easy. The good thing with this as well, since this app is, and JavaScript and everything is actually hosted out in Azure. So whenever I need to do an update to my app, I just update that web app. Don't have to do anything with the clients at all. So it's very easy to deploy updates or fixes or whatever. Yes. So that was basically the 5 scenarios I wanted to cover. And I really like this world. And as I started saying that I need to redo this session every time because there's new stuff coming. And as an architect or an SharePoint future professional, you should keep at least one of your eyes on Azure and what's happening there. And for the next 2 weeks, don't work anything. Spend time listening to webcasts for Build and Ignite. There's a lot of announcements coming out there as well. There's a lot of things that makes it so much easier than it was just 2 years ago or 3 years ago when the app model was introduced. It wasn't this easy to just build apps back then. But everything is there. The plumbing in Visual Studio is even better. It was decent to start with at least, but the different services is out there, and it's very cheap running this one as well. It's cheap. It doesn't consume much compute power or whatever. So it's a cheap hosting option. And my favorite part is that I don't need to hire SharePoint developers anymore. I need to hire Azure developers, as I call it. Because first of all, it's much more fun being an Azure developer. If you're a SharePoint developer, yeah, we can do .NET Framework 3.5. How fun is that? And that kind of stuff. So look at Azure. Test and build out stuff, especially I think the logic apps can be a killer app for the future and very easy. Just you provide your endpoints for your company, and then the end users should be able to use logic apps to build their stuff. Unfortunately, they cannot because you don't want them to be tenant admins in your Azure portal, right? But hopefully we get some good way of people to just like the SharePoint designer, but that we have in Azure design, we can upload our apps. Logic apps into Azure. With that, thank you everyone. And if you have any questions, I'll be lurking around in corners around the conference center here, and just ask me a question. Thank you.